All right. All right, everybody, and welcome back. I'm Chris Allen, the co-host of the Dynasty Owners Manual podcast, and we are here with part 5 of our positional series. We've now moved on to tight ends. I'm going to bring in Adam here in just a second to recap the entire series because we've had quite a few, notable and wonderful guests that have really brought in their knowledge of the specific positions that we've been discussing over the past 4 shows. And our final guest for the series is, he really rounds out the entire group. He brings the entire room together. He's been on the show a couple of times beforehand. You've seen his work on the Quant Edge. You've seen his work on, Fantasy Data NFL. You've seen his work. My gosh, on the Black Book with Joe Pisapia and some of the greater, analysts and writers that you'll see out on it within the industry. We've got Debro in with us this morning. And Derek, first of all, thank you for taking the time to walk us through, your understanding and your knowledge behind the tight end position. And how you doing, man?
Doing good, guys. How y'all been? This all season is churning along. We are quickly getting towards training camp and pre-season.
It's wild, right? Because I feel like this summer has just completely blown by. We're getting to the point where, we're already getting into training camp speculation. We're hearing some news already. We've got the DeAndre Hopkins news that he's on the pup. Julian Edelman, I saw something about that this morning. Like his thumb is in a brace.
Somebody was hardcore looking at that picture. Got a brace up underneath the glove, man. That was through the glove. I was like, ooh,
computer enhanced. Trying to figure out what's going on underneath that glove. So it's kind of wild. So that's where we're at in the off season right now. It's time to set aside we're here to talk about dynasty, and we're here to talk about rookies and their impact within the league, but really, we're getting into how some of these players are going to impact your rosters in 2019. And so who else to bring in and talk about some of the tight ends than Derek? And Adam, I guess just before we get into the discussions about tight ends, can you walk the folks back through everything that we've done so far in order to get to this point in the series?
Absolutely. Thank you all so much for listening. And you're listening to the 5th episode of the positional series, as Chris mentioned. So the first episode was with Matt Harmon on wide receivers. Everybody knows Matt from Reception Perception. And then we had Mark Schofield to talk quarterbacks. We had Bob Lung to talk running backs. And then we had Justin Edwards to talk offensive line, which is arguably the most important position in fantasy football. So that was interesting to break that down and see how all the offensive lines relate to the players that we care about and which offensive lines are coming back strong. So you're listening to episode 5 again. And if you didn't listen to the other ones, obviously there's no order. Just get them done.
Absolutely. And I think that you can listen to these in whatever order that you really want to. It's all about how, if you want to be able to supplement your understanding of each position, right? Because if you wanted to know or understand the nuances behind quarterbacking, let's sit down and, talk with Mark Schofield. If you wanted to get a better idea of consistency and how that affects the running back position, then just pull up the episode with Bob Lung. You can pop in and out as you please, but it really is about you as the owner, as the manager of your dynasty team, trying to figure out how to better understand the parts and pieces to your team. So if you're weak at running back and you want to try and make a push and you want to try and understand how you can better leverage your understanding of the position, pull up that episode, and then that will definitely help you. And of course, when it comes to tight ends, I can't think of a more more nuanced position, right? Because tight ends are not just receivers, even though they're a part of, their fantasy production comes through being wide receivers, but there's so much more to the position. So Derek, can you talk to us real quick about, some of the things that we don't really care about when it comes to tight ends, but it's important to the position, at least from an NFL perspective?
Well, I think it if you break it down, it's the reason why you see and everybody talks about tight ends taking longer to develop. It's the getting down to it. It's the basement reason is because they're not only receivers. They have to learn route running, route concepts, where they're going to be on the field as far as if they were split into the slot. But these are also offensive linemen, so they're basically learning 2 positions in one. So we talk about that learning curve for tight ends, looking at the second, the third years as being those breakout years for tight ends is because, you're taking a guy from the college level And depending on how he was deployed, some of these guys are converted wide receivers. Some of them were only asked to be those athletic downfield threats, like you look at Mike Gesicki last year. Everybody knew walking into the league, that dude could not block for shit. Didn't stop Gase from trying to make him into an inline tight end. But that's part of the reason why maybe we saw him flop. But all this is to say is that the nuance, the blocking, the two-part positions rolled into one role, those two things are why you see that learning curve and see these tight ends, that it's such an outlier for these guys to produce not only in year one, but maybe even into year two, and we don't see the breakout until possibly year 3 into the league.
Yeah, so Derek, what really defines a good tight end then if we have to consider all of those extra aspects?
I mean, it really comes down to deployment. Like, how is a team going to use that particular position? And for dynasty or fantasy purposes, what is the team looking for out of that player? Like I was talking about Mike Gesicki, he was poorly characterized as an inline tight end. Now that we're looking at a different era of the NFL, and these tight ends are being used more as wide receivers. So a lot of these upper tier guys, like you have your Zach Ertz, Travis Kelce, these guys are spending less than around 30% of their snaps as inline tight ends. They're primarily just big slot players. So, yes, can a Travis Kelce run block? Yes, absolutely. Is he being asked to do that as much as some other tight ends? Probably not. I mean, when I was looking into some of my research earlier in the offseason, George Kittle stands out as a guy who played inline a ton last year. Like I was talking about that 30% mark, dude, George Kittle was in line as a tight end 55% of the time. And so I think that's huge for understanding what his role is, not only for the San Francisco 49ers, but just in the NFL, because no two tight ends are used or deployed in the same fashion. So a lot of this comes down to not only like this player's skill set, but the team's concept as to how they're going to utilize not only that player, but the position itself.
And so I'm wondering, I guess from a full-on like team building perspective, it's almost like we need to understand what the player can do on the field, but then also what the team needs the player to do once they get on the field. Because if you're looking at a tight end that is more of, let's say, a move tight end, that wouldn't necessarily lend itself to a team that has a weaker offensive line, right? Because there's no way that tight end is going to be able to block and do the things necessary in order for them to actually, I guess, produce for us, at least in terms of fantasy. So we need to understand, I guess, that duality of the position, right? Like if they can actually perform as a blocker and a wide receiver, but also, I guess, as if the NFL team that they're getting put on actually can use them the way that they're supposed to be used. I think the way that you phrased your Gesicki comparison is perfect. I mean, because if he was actually able to develop as a receiver, as a move tight end as he was, versus being pigeonholed into being a blocker, I think we would have seen a lot more production out of him in Miami, right?
Oh, absolutely. And I think you hit the nail on the head there, Chris. It comes down to not only player skill set and where they are in their development, but if they're asked to play a different role on a team or a different part of a scheme and be more of that inline tight end, but it's a guy coming out, take this year's rookie class. You have a TJ Hawkinson who is, everybody's seen the film clips. Everybody knows, even if you don't know much about tight ends, everybody's seen the clips of this dude just being a dominant run blocker. So can he be more of an inline tight end like a George Kittle? So on a team like the Lions that want to run the damn ball down your throat, is he a guy that's going to come off the field very often, or is he going to play a higher snap percentage even as a rookie because of said blocking ability versus, if he was, say, an Evan Ingram and he was drafted by the Lions and this is going to be a very run-heavy team, if he's a guy that can't run block, if he's a guy that's better as a big slot wide receiver, is that a poor match for his skill set? Yeah, I think understanding not only the player's skill set, but understanding where they fit into all of that is crucial in figuring out what their value is, not only in the NFL, but for fantasy purposes.
So I wanted to quickly, I guess, pick apart a point that you had made earlier. So we were talking about, and we'll get into this a bit more, but you had mentioned George Kittle. And so you'd mentioned his, I guess, abnormally high inline rate as compared to the other tight ends. So if we were looking at, I guess the chance of repeatability, because last season, I mean, Kittle, I mean, what did he wind up breaking the rookie tight end record? I wasn't sure if he wound up doing that or not. I thought so.
He broke the yardage.
That's what I thought. Okay,
we had all kinds of records broken last year.
Oh yeah,
he almost broke the record for single yards in a game, but Shanahan, quote unquote, forgot.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, but. So Kittle winds up breaking a record. We have Zach Ertz going off in Philadelphia. And then, of course, we've got Travis Kelce holding it down in Kansas City. So we've got those big three. But now I guess the question that most folks are having as they're drafting for 2019 is who has that sustainability? Who has the best chance to repeat? Travis Kelce with Patrick Mahomes, that's a lock. I mean, well, not a lock, but I guess we have the most.
No, you're right. It's a lock.
I hope so. I mean, I have enough shares of them that I hope that's the case. Zach Ertz with Dallas Goedert, I guess there's some questions around that particular situation. We'll talk about that. But it seems like from what you're saying that if San Francisco, they have, I think all 5 of their starters from the previous season returning on the offensive line, plus they have George Kittle, who also played in line as a blocker. It seems like Kittle has a fairly decent chance to at least, not necessarily from a yardage perspective because he had a lot of yards after the catch, but at least from a volume perspective, he should be able to match some of the targets that he had last season, no?
I think that – so everybody talks about YAC not being a very sticky stat. We all hear that every single day. But I think some of this comes down to also – I think that George Kittle can reproduce a lot of these numbers. I think the needle is still pointing up for him. Now, is that saying, okay, he's going to break the yardage record again? No, but I think he's going to compensate. I think he's going to have more touchdowns. I actually think that he's going to play in line a similar amount, if not maybe a smidge more. And if you look at his metrics, he was actually better in line. His QBR was 96 compared to like 79 in the slot. Catch rate was better. He was more effective because if you're looking at his athletic profile, matching him up against a safety that's going to cover him, or even a linebacker as an inline tight end, dude, he could eat that up all freaking day. And from the YAC perspective, a lot of that comes down to scheme. Can we not safely say that Shanahan is a good coordinator? So if we say that, you put more weapons around him. 15 of his targets, and he had a 151 QBR on routes in the flat. Now, what I look at that is, okay, YAC. Okay, you take a guy that is just a freak, like athletic-wise, and you put him in space, which a lot of that comes down to scheme and just damn good coaching. Mm-hmm. You put better weapons around him this year, healthier slot weapons, like because you got a Deebo Samuel, you got a possibly healthy Trent Taylor, you have Dante Pettis. All those guys are going to factor into the slot. So if Kittle was better in line, if he gets maybe a few more snaps in line, and we know and we've seen that this guy can scheme him into space. YAC is not predictable and sticky year after year, but do I think that it's something repeatable and absolutely within the range of outcomes for George Kittle to do something similar this year? Absolutely.
I think that high in line percentage that we saw last year is kind of indicative of the team situation that we saw, because it shows kind of how they intended on deploying him. I don't think the team knew quite what they had in George Kittle early. And that inline percentage shows how they would have liked to use George Kittle. And then I think the lack of weapons with Goodwin and Garcon injured really let Kittle highlight his athletic ability, so that, now that doesn't really matter because the team has seen it now. So now he becomes a focal point in the offense, and maybe they go get a wide receiver earlier if George Kittle didn't break the yardage record last year. So I think the devil's advocates are saying that, he had to produce like that last year. But with Jimmy Garoppolo coming back and staying healthy, hopefully, and then add Deebo Samuel, and as you mentioned, all of those guys will factor into the slot. Plus, Marquise Goodwin, when healthy, just opens the field up for everybody because he's going to take the top off the defense. So I think realistically, I'm probably a little too low on Kittle. I could see him easily being the tight end 1 next year.
I think so too. Absolutely, Adam.
Should be pretty easy because of the age factor too. Kelsey's getting over the hump, and then we'll talk about Ertz here soon. But from an analytic perspective, do you have any data points that you're looking at for tight end and shows us who has a better chance of producing?
I think that, so we're talking about the use and the role of this position. I mean, a lot of what you look at for tight ends, you break them down slightly similarly to wide receivers as far as looking at target share. You're looking at air yards. You're looking at where these guys are being used on the field. But the spots that I kind of like to target also for the tight end position that you see kind of trend with these breakout players or these upper echelon tight ends. And some of this goes down to size and athleticism. So not only is it like fantasy points per route, because we're talking about efficiency there, and guys that if they're producing on whatever volume they're given, are when they produce on that volume, are they commanding or should they be commanding a higher volume? So fantasy points per route I like to use. And I was talking about size and athleticism. I mean, these for the position, you're talking about guys that are 6'4", 6'5", some of them are even 6'6", towering athletic monsters down the field that are just dominating the middle parts of the field. So I'm also looking at contested catch. And with a lot of those players, so you look at the top three of tight ends, okay? So Kittel, Ertz, Kelsey, all three of those guys are in top 3 to 5 in both contested catch and fantasy points per routes.
So I'm wondering then if you take all of that data and you wind up now you're sitting there in front of your draft board or in your startup league. So now let's transition taking that information into, I guess, practical application, as we like to call it here on the show. So when it comes to the tight end position, I mean, we've all been through this. We all understand the fact that even with the first tier, it's not just Gronkowski anymore. Rest in peace. We've got 3 viable top tier elite tight ends that you could choose from, and then it's essentially everybody else, right? You've got the middle class, your Evan Ingrams, and your Hunter Henrys, and those types of guys. But really, the drop off from the top tier to everybody else, it's pretty steep. So from a strategy perspective, is there really? After you look through some of the data, and you're mentioning Kittle's inline rate, and we've been talking about the fantasy route or the points per route run and things of that nature. I guess, is there any logic, or is there any reason for you to pay up for some of these guys? I guess it depends on the format, obviously, right? Because if it's tight end premium, that's the tide that raises all boats. So of course, tight end position looks a lot more. It looks better that way. But is there, a thought process behind you wanting to pay up for any of those 3 guys in any league, depending on what type of format it is?
I'm usually more of a late round kind of stick it. I usually go one of 2 routes with tight ends, and that's either going with the veteran kind of value because you're either, if you pay up for that position, you're getting a leg up on some of your league mates in some aspects, in the sense of, positional scarcity and things of that nature. But what you could be missing as far as top tier running backs, wide receivers, I think is more, especially in the wide receivers, because we see those, they're more fantasy viable year after year, less injuries, all that kind of good stuff. Now, if you're going to pay up for the tight end position, then I think the only guy that I'm probably willing to pay up at this point for is probably George Kittle, because I think he's still an ascending asset. Whereas Kelsey, even if you play in the 2-year window, could we see him? He's what, 30, 31?
Yeah.
So, he's still in that prime of his career. I think that the only 2 guys that, if you're going to go win now, which we all should be going, I could see paying up for Kelsey depending on where he drops. But the only guy that I'm probably willing to possibly reach for, because I still think the ceiling is, we probably haven't seen it yet, both in touchdowns and, the yardage was there, but can he reproduce that this year like I'm talking about, is probably Kittle. I'm more likely to go with the late round strategy, in the sense of going with a veteran guy that's going to give me middle tier production, or going with a second-year player that we just haven't seen pop yet, like a Mike Gesicki, an Ian Thomas, who could be a year away from being that middle tier tight end. You can get him dirt cheap in drafts right now. Those are both my strategies. I can understand the pay up, but there's such a small sampling, or size of players that I'm willing to pay up for, that I'm probably going to miss on them in drafts because it's really just 2 players for me.
So you talked a little bit about trying to get the next guys. That's what I try to do is if it's too expensive to try to get those guys. Now, you did mention the difference in position and how much of an advantage it gives you. It does give you a very good advantage to have a good tight end. I firmly believe that. I mean, in redraft, I stream tight end almost exclusively, but in Dynasty, I like to set it and forget it. So I try to find the next guy a lot, and I'll take my shots. And so let's talk a little bit about O.J. Howard, and I'll throw David Njoku in there too. First, with O.J. Howard, Bruce Arians neglects the tight end position apparently. I can't recall a tight end that I feel like shouldn't have been neglected. I think O.J. Howard might be the best tight end he's ever had to work with. What do you think about O.J. Howard going forward?
I absolutely love O.J. Howard, and I don't really necessarily think that because yes, we've all talked about Arians has never had great tight ends, but I don't necessarily know that when he had a decent tight end that he necessarily neglected the position in the sense that, look, if you go all the way back to when Arians was with the Steelers, they had Heath Miller. Everybody's talked about all this. But the fact that the Steelers they never finished higher than 18th in passing attempts in the NFL. But over that same period, Heath Miller averaged 76 targets. And I think that's healthy volume considering everything we've talked about with Arians and his tight ends. And you look at the other places he's gone. I mean, Arizona, they never had a tight end to speak of. So the last time that he had somebody that was even marginally comparable to an O.J. Howard, Arians used him, and he used him a lot. And now you're looking at O.J. Howard, who the guy is, I think he could be the best shot. If you're going to shoot your shot, then I think you need to go with O.J. Howard as far as being the guy that could break out and be this year's George Kittle. I mean, the guy's already shown that he could be uber efficient all the way down the field. If you look at last year, okay, out of the 25 tight ends with 45 or more targets, O.J. Howard had the 7th highest catch rate at 70%, despite leading all tight ends in yards per target at 11.77. And so a guy that we all know that he is an uber athlete. We all know that he can stretch the field, but he's been efficient when doing it. And like I was talking about, like when Arians had Heath Miller, who is not even close to being comparable to O.J. Howard as far as from an athletic standpoint. I think that I love Chris Godwin this year. Do not get me wrong. This is not any shade at Chris Godwin. But I think that we're underselling also the fact that O.J. Howard could be the second option in this passing offense, and it might not be Chris Godwin this year just because of the mismatch that he proposes for opposing defenses.
So let's add in David Njoku, then an honorable mention to Evan Ingram, but he's already popped and he's already expensive, so there's not much reason to mention him. With David Njoku, I've seen flashes from him and I've liked him for a long time. I own him in a lot of places because, in a way, to me, he has similar upside but less likely to reach it. What do you think about David Njoku and the Browns' new offense?
I like David Njoku a whole lot. And like I was talking about all the downfield usage of O.J. Howard, that was under Todd Monken last year. And so now Todd Monken taking his bag of tricks all the way to Cleveland, I think is a great thing for David Njoku, who has the athleticism to stretch the field and be used down the field just like O.J. Howard was. But the thing that I worry about with David Njoku moving forward, because Dorsey already talked about it this year. He talked about him struggling as a run blocker, and David Njoku, I'm trying to pull up the numbers right now, but David Njoku was used more in line than a lot of those other tight ends we were talking about previously. And so looking at him, if he doesn't get the run blocking down, I think he's a guy that you need to worry about. If he doesn't solidify that part of his game this year, considering how much they used him as a run blocker last year and inline, I think that he's a guy that we could. Everybody talks about Demetrius Harris going to die in Cleveland and getting signed there. I think that if you look at David Njoku and you look at Demetrius Harris, if Njoku doesn't get the run blocking down, could he lose snaps to somebody like a Demetrius Harris? I think it's definitely possible this coming season. So, yeah, looking at it, David Njoku played inline 46% of the time and a slot receiver 40% of the time. So that tick is above what I was talking about, that 30, mid-30s mark. So I think that is like we're talking about fantasy production, that is a part of his game that if it doesn't develop, he might be a guy that you need to be looking to sell mid-season instead of looking to buy into, much less he's got more competition for targets than somebody like an O.J. Howard. Now, what that happens for next year, if you look at Landry's contract, if they decide to go another direction, or if Njoku has a breakout season this year, could he be the number 2 option in the passing offense behind Odell next year walking into it? If all these things fall into place, it absolutely could happen. But I think there's a little bit more worry than somebody like O.J. Howard for me.
And
That's interesting.
2 very capable running backs in the passing game as well. He could the ceiling sky high and the floor is bottomed out because he could easily be the 2nd option or the 5th option. So he's going to be an interesting player this year.
Mm-hmm. And I think, well, first of all, back to the Bruce Arians point. So you guys need to go ahead and rethink about the tight ends that Bruce Arians has had, because this Jermaine Gresham slander, I'm not going to have it. This podcast, fellas, like, I'm just not going to have it.
You mean O.J. Howard's hobo brother? Okay.
Exactly. So, I mean, the man played in Cincinnati. I got to take care of my brethren. I mean, we
go in the league.
We can't have this, guys. Come on now. But I think the big thing, though, that you were mentioning earlier about with David Njoku, and I've heard this before, and I think it's poignant, because if we're not, again, back to the duality of the tight end position, we already understand David Njoku's athleticism and his ability as a receiver. I mean, we saw plenty of that in 2018, but if he's not able to develop as a blocker, his ability to stay on the field and his ability to get snaps is going to be like heavily reduced. I think the easiest comparison that I can think of when it comes to like how he's going to be deployed, it sounds like the Tyler Higbee, Gerald Everett thing that they had in LA. And while Gerald Everett, everybody was drafting Everett because he's the pass catching, like, move tight end. That's what he's known for. But because he wasn't known for being a blocker, that's Tyler Higbee's job. So Higbee was the one that was playing in line and being able to chip real quick and run out and catch a pass, which will wind up letting him fall into the end zone. But that should have been Everett. That's what everybody was hoping for. So without being able to, I guess, improve on your pass blocking chops, like, this is what we might see happen in I don't know if, while this in 2019, I think there are some concerns that the Rams will be able to keep up their offensive pace. But in terms of production, I mean, if Cleveland is even able to come close to what LA can do, we're hoping to see David Njoku take a piece of that, but it might not be as much. I don't know if that's going to be the case, but I can totally see that happening with the way that you have it laid out, Derek.
Well, and you saw last year was like a tale of 2 seasons for Njoku. The beginning of the year with Haley and stuff, he was used in a higher volume role. And towards the end of the year, his volume went down, but his yards per target went up and his yards per reception went up. And I think considering what he produced in the second part of the season, and I got a tweet out, I don't know the numbers off the top of my head, about how that all broke down. I think that at least as a receiver, it was some good stuff, considering that I think that you see him used in that second half role with Monken more this year as a downfield threat.
Interesting. And so the other, we'd already touched upon it earlier with Zach Ertz, but I guess his situational deployment now, we've got Zach Ertz, we've got Goddard now coming on in his second year, but then we also have the addition, we have the return of Deshaun Jackson, we've got the addition of JJ Arcega-Whiteside. So with all of, I mean, Philadelphia just has so many weapons, and it all intersects at Carson Wentz. But if we're assuming that Zach Ertz can keep up just the massive target share and the yardage that he was able to produce in 2018, I mean, is that something we should be concerned about if those are expectations for him in 2019?
I think that everybody should be very concerned about Zach Ertz. I don't see him reproducing the massive target numbers. I think his target share will be healthy. Obviously, I think he's probably going to be in that 115 to 120 range. But I think last year you looked at it as it should be looked at it was a perfect storm for Zach Ertz. I mean, they had nobody to stretch the field. Everybody kept getting hurt. The ability for both the quarterback to do what they needed to do and for that offense to run in an efficient manner. I mean, Zach Ertz was basically all they had. They didn't have anybody to take a top off of defense. Now you have a Deshaun Jackson because last year they tried Mike Wallace, Mac Hollins. Both got hurt. And so I think not only the addition of weapons, but the types of weapons that are there now in Philly, I think is a very big concern for Zach Ertz. Much less, and my partner in crime over at Triple T Pod, Aton has talked about the contract for Zach Ertz. And if you look at the breakdown, his contract in the next 2 years, Philly is showing us what they want to do with their roster, man. They went out in the draft in the last 2 years, and all they're doing is handcuffing all of these high-priced vets. I mean, you have Zach Ertz, you have Jeffrey, you have Jason Peters. They've handcuffed all these freaking positions, man. They got Dillard, they got Goddard, they got J.J. Arcega-Whiteside. They got all these guys, so when it comes time, and these guys are aging, and they're saying, okay, now we need to pay Carson Wentz. Now we need to pay some of these defensive players. We could do that because the aging veteran in these other skill positions, we already got your replacement, dude. He's already in here, and he's been in the system for 2 years. So I love what Philly is doing from a roster perspective, but as far as like looking at Zach Ertz's outlook for not only this year, but in Dynasty for next season and the season after that, if you're playing in that 2 year, maybe 3 year window, it's time to get rid of Zach Ertz all day.
And I made sure to include J.J. Arcega-Whiteside in the show sheet because in college he had 14 touchdowns in just 12 games. And if you watch his film, I always argued that he was a one-trick pony, but that didn't mean that I didn't like him, especially in the late first. I know early in the offseason when Chris and I did our mock with the Devi crew, we both liked J.J. Arcega-Whiteside at 12, and that's when he was going in the second. And granted, he didn't do the combine, so a lot of people were low on him at the time, but his one trick is scoring in the red zone. The guy will just do this little half-ass fade and box somebody out like he's getting a rebound, and there's almost nothing that the cornerback can do about it. And that worries me almost as much as the production we saw from Goddard last year, because we saw Ertz be good with Trey Burton. Trey Burton came on in the end of the season, and Ertz still produced. So I don't know that I'm necessarily too worried about that. I think that might implore more two tight end sets to use Goddard.
Trey Burton and Goddard are different players too. If you look at Goddard, he has more size. Sure. I think you can factor in. I mean, Trey Burton's only 6'3" versus Goddard. He's 6'5", 6'6".
I think he's 6'6".
And that size is huge, man. Let's talk about the size and athleticism. If you look at the tight end position as a whole, the top 20 guys as far as touchdowns last year, only 2 of those guys are below 6'4". You have Trey Burton and Gerald Everett. Everybody else is above the height of 6'4", and that 1 inch might not sound like a whole hell of a lot, but you're boxing dudes out in the red zone like you're talking about, Adam.
Yeah.
That wingspan, that means a lot, man. Some of these video clips we're going to get to later absolutely point that out.
Yeah, I can definitely see them not paying. I mean, they're one of the, probably, I would maybe say they're the smartest. Well, yeah. They're also probably the smartest front office, in my opinion. Maybe the Colts, but you're right. They handcuffed all their vets. They're not going to have to pay them. They're going to get out from Alshon Jeffrey. They paid him too much money. That was a weird extension. No reason to pay Ertz when he comes up. So you're absolutely right. I might want to get out from under him. I might do something while you can still get OJ Howard plus is why I would probably do that. Think more like when you were seeing that window for trading Antonio Brown for Juju. That's how I look at the Ertz situation. Maybe find your next top 3 and trade for.
Or you find somebody that's fading Kittle. You find somebody that's fading Kittle and it's willing to sit there and be like, all right, he's not going to reproduce what he's doing. And you're saying, all right, well, fine. Then give me Kittle and a little something on top, and you can have Ertz, man. I mean, this guy, 150 plus targets. He's going to do it. Kittle's not going to redo it. And then you just walk away, you just laugh behind your teeth the whole damn time.
Yeah, especially if you look at their offensive situations, because if you want to compare, I mean, if you wanted to spin the narrative, I mean, there's no way that San Francisco is going to be able to put up the same level of production as Philadelphia, or at least from, projecting into the 2019 season. Philadelphia looks like they're going to be, I mean, at the very least, division contenders, might be conference contenders, depending on how the season shakes out. I mean, they're one of the top offenses in the NFC. I mean, that's definitely not the case for San Francisco unless something wild happens, which is entirely possible because it is the NFL.
I don't know. Jerick McKinnon's healthy.
It's possible.
Oh,
Anything's
God.
possible with Jerick McKinnon on the field. Don't even
I
get me
was
started.
waiting for the slight. I was waiting.
Yeah, it had to happen. I mean, I
was
wanted to try
going to
and get
put the
through
time
show.
wrong, but I didn't know if I had time to set it.
Wanted to try and get through a show without him bringing up Jerick McKinnon.
Yeah, I
Couldn't do
can't
it.
let that happen.
I mean, we're just besmirching everybody, Chris. So, I mean, we're talking bad about Jermaine Gresham.
I mean,
We're
just the
hurting Jerick
slander.
McKinnon. The truthers are going to
Slander
be
is real
lit
this
today.
morning, man. Yeah, slander is just real this morning.
All right,
I
guys.
can't get too.
We have 2 injured guys to get to before we start getting into this film. Actually, I guess 3 because Jason Witten's probably so old that he's considered injured anyways.
Probably.
Let's talk about Greg Olsen first because I'm watching the All or Nothing because somebody tweeted that he's like the annoying brother that nobody can stand, and that was weird to me because he has this persona in the NFL of being like, one of the vets that's seen it all, and then you watch this, you're like, damn, Greg Olsen is annoying as hell. But does he still have value in the Panthers offense? We know he's Cam's safety blanket, but every year with this foot, man.
He's got value, but it's waning. It's absolutely waning. And a lot of this is coming, like we're talking about the injury issues and stuff. But I mean, just if you look at the last few seasons for Greg Olsen, I mean, 2013 to 2016, he was averaging 7.2 targets per game. Now that drops off to 5.4 in 2017 and then 5 flat in 2018. I think that Greg Olsen still has at least this season. So you probably, I mean, if you're on a contending team, you need to go try to get him on your team because if the foot holds up, I think he's going to give you mid to back end tight end 1 value just because of his red zone involvement alone. I mean, 2018, 7 games, he played near, I say near because we don't freaking know how, near full health. He still had 6 red zone targets. And so I think that he still is probably going to be a guy that could garner anywhere between 6 to maybe, if this Panthers offense is in the red zone a ton and just operating super efficiently with breakouts from DJ Moore and Curtis Samuel, then he could be anywhere in that 6 to 9 touchdown range. So if you're a contending team, everybody's looking at Greg Olsen as probably the last year. Hell, maybe he goes 2 years, but if you're a contending team, you can get it for pennies on the dollar for that type of production for this coming season.
Yeah, and it seems like everybody wants to invest in Ian Thomas when we saw him in spurts like last season. So I think is prudent. I mean, obviously you want to try and, I guess, supplement your roster with some of these younger players that are coming in. So I'm wholeheartedly behind that train of logic, but still, Greg Olsen's there. We've seen him produce in the past. And again, the assumption that he's healthy, that the foot will hold up, I still think you can get, I agree with you, Derek. I mean, somewhere like tight end 10, tight end 12, somewhere in there. I think that's where his value holds when currently, at least from a redraft perspective, I mean, he's probably in the TE 15 plus range. That's where he's being drafted right now. So I think there's, he can easily outkick that ADP.
Well, and the sneaky move on your league is to go trade for Greg Olsen now. And then about week 3, when Greg Olsen's putting up some touchdowns and stuff like that, and then everybody's like, man, I don't know if he's going to play next year or what that looks like. If he is playing well, then you go trade for Ian Thomas and you just corner the market on both Panthers tight ends at different points.
Yeah, because Ian Thomas won't be expensive at that point.
Yep.
Right.
I think you got a good chance of seeing something like you saw with Jimmy Graham last year or 2 years ago. It was pretty decent. He got the job done. But last guy we're going to talk about is Hunter Henry. This guy, I guess I don't know much about, but I've never been really on board with him. That he never showed it to me. So can you sell me on Hunter Henry after the injury?
I like Hunter Henry a lot. And what I think kind of plays into some of what I look at for Hunter Henry is I'm really kind of curious right now what this whole contract situation looks like for somebody like Melvin Gordon. If you don't have Melvin Gordon in that backfield, do the Chargers go a little bit more pass heavy this coming season? I mean, we all know that the targets are probably there considering Antonio Gates, Tyrell Williams. You're looking at in the neighborhood of 100 targets vacated. Now, we all talk about Rivers didn't pass as much last year.
Mhm.
I want to say it was 508 passing attempts. In the last few seasons, he's hovered more around the 570 range. So if we don't have Melvin Gordon back there, it's an easy path to get back to that 570, 580 range as far as passing attempts. But as far as Hunter Henry himself, I think the guy could absolutely explode this year in the sense that if you look at how he's started his career, he compares on a per game basis very, very favorably to two other upper echelon tight ends that, well, they've reached that upper echelon at various points of their career, and Zach Ertz and Greg Olsen. Out of these three guys, in the first 2 years of their career, they've all averaged between 2.8 and 3.1 receptions per game and between 32 and 36 receiving yards per game. Hunter Henry is right smack dab in the middle of all of that, because as much as we all love Zach Ertz, we all got to be kind of rewind for a second and remember that only a few seasons ago, this is a guy we're talking about can't put together a full upper echelon type of season. Like, okay, he was a down the stretch type of guy, but we never saw it for an entire 16 games out of him. Now, could this be the year that Hunter Henry explodes, considering the volume could be there, increased passing could be there with Melvin Gordon's situation, and we know Austin Eckler is not a guy that can tote the rock 20 times a game. I love Justin Jackson, but there's still unprovenness to that. And so does this lean for the Chargers to go more pass heavy with Phillip Rivers and an ascending group of weapons around him? And can, like we're talking about, rising tide raise all ships, can Hunter Henry be part of that? It definitely could for this year.
I think so. And with the way that he was trying to push himself, because it seemed like for a time Henry was trying to push himself so that he could make it back for the playoffs last year, right? So it seems like, at least from a conditioning standpoint, we shouldn't have as much of an issue, at least in terms of like lingering injuries, like from the ACL tear. So
he should be recovered from that this year.
Yeah, he should be recovered from that. So I don't think that the general stigma that comes with ACL tears, where we have to kind of wait it out to see if there are any compensatory injuries and things of that nature, kind of like what Allen Robinson experienced, like when he moved over to Chicago, where he had like a couple of games where he was off, hamstring, ankle injuries, things of that nature, where it was just he was out for a couple of games. I don't think we'll have to see that with Hunter Henry. I think it'll be easier for him to, I guess, integrate back into the offense. And then even if they have to switch to a Justin Jackson, Austin Eckler combination in 2019, I think with the rapport that he showed with Phillip Rivers before he went down, he should be able to kind of work his way seamlessly into the offense, I think.
Well, and looking at volume too, the other thing that I wanted to kind of get in here real quickly, as far as the path for Hunter Henry to be this 110 target type of guy. If you look at the last 3 years with Hunter Henry and this whole entire offense, last year the Chargers were third in target share for their running backs. You look at the two previous seasons with Hunter Henry on the field, that target share dropped off. So I think that there's a definitive path to the targets flowing back in Hunter Henry's direction, and for that wave to be higher than he's ever seen before.
It does seem like that has been the piece of it, because I know that Gates play for as old as he is fun to watch, but at least from a fantasy, want to be able to see them move the chains into more, like he 17 or 2018. But I won't want to some of like Kittel, Kelsey that can get you can actually move back. I think Hunter Henry mold and can like all that contract situation will get sorted out. I don't know. But moving on to the film, so we wanted to walk through at least just a few examples of what we see while we're on the field, and how some of these tight ends can actually become, I guess, fantasy relevant, because it's not just about their receiving production. Of course, that's what makes them relevant to us as dynasty owners, but really they have to be, I guess, tactically relevant. Like the coaches and teams have to want to put them out there on the field for one reason or another, and that comes from them being able to, I guess, block and also run and also execute the plays as designed. So the first one that I'm going to bring up is one of the best to ever do it, Rob Gronkowski, and this is taken from the Super Bowl, and I think this was close to like the fourth quarter, if I'm not mistaken. And one of the seam routes that he was running in order to get them into scoring position. I don't believe they scored on this particular play, but I guess Derek, walk us through like what you're seeing, like as Rob Gronkowski, as he releases, he's running the seam route, and it seems like he just blows right by the linebacker. There's nothing they can do when you've got an accurate passer in Tom Brady, and you have a receiver like Gronk that can track the ball in traffic because he's got three guys around him, and he comes down with what I believe is just a beautiful pass that puts them into scoring position.
Well, you look at the size and the athleticism in this. I mean, he's constantly fighting off the linebacker through the entire route. There's not a whole lot of, we're talking about straight line athleticism. This is just sheer physicality with Gronk right now. And if you look at that, he didn't do anything crazy. There wasn't any kind of he didn't, put a move on the guy or there wasn't any kind of separation with that. This is honestly just Gronk using his size and his strength to outmuscle the guy on what looks like a straight go route.
And I love this because you just don't see – I'm trying to think of a better comparison to, I guess, what Gronk offered on the field in terms of both being a receiver and a blocker. I don't think that there's too many other guys. I mean, we can talk about what is it? The Atlanta tight end who was also with the Chiefs before that. I'm trying to remember his name.
Tony Gonzalez.
I think I was going to forget. The name wasn't coming to me. But you think about players like that, the guys that really understood the duality of the position, such that they were able to do things like this, like where you expect them to be on the line, you expect them to be able to, to perform that blocks, but then it's just once they go out to run a route, they're past you. I mean, they're already rolling past you, and that's when I guess good quarterbacks like Tom Brady are able to thread the needle and put up something like this. So it's interesting to see how you can put together, I guess, understand a player's receiving chops, but then it also comes down to what they can do as a blocker. So now when we're looking at him as a blocker. Oh, this is the wrong video. I need to find the other video. But the one that I want to try and pull up is this other video that I have of Gronk as a blocker. So real quick, can you walk us through, I guess, some of the as I pull up this video, can you walk us through what Gronk was able to offer as a blocker? That's one of those things that we really didn't look into all that much, because really, if he's not picking up yards, picking up touchdowns, it's not something we typically care about, right?
Oh, absolutely, man. But if you look at what the Patriots were able to do, especially down the playoffs and down the stretch, and hell, in years past, everybody talks about there's been more speak of the Patriots as a run-first team in recent seasons as Tom Brady's gotten a little bit older. But if you don't have a Gronk there, would the Patriots still be able to have done some of these things, like in this clip that you're going to show, that have allowed the Patriots to be that run-first team and absolutely, like in the playoffs, just run it down to the team's throats? I don't know if you necessarily see that. Yes, their offensive line is still top 5 in the NFL, but like this play right here, like we're at to see, Gronk seals the edge, and if we do not get that space for the running back to slip around the corner right there, if he doesn't seal the edge with that linebacker and create the space between that and the safety or the corner that's coming in, the running back doesn't have the ability to even nudge off the tackle. He would have been stopped for about a 1 or 2 yard gain.
Now, that's a pretty massive hole. We talked about some of the offensive line workings in our previous episode with Justin Edwards, but these are just, it's daylight, right? This is not the same type of traffic that running backs are probably used to seeing. They're used to seeing just absolute war zone with bodies going everywhere. But what I believe this is Gillislee that's able to run this run up behind him. You don't get opportunities like this all the time.
Well, and watch as he bends around the corner and creates just a little bit more separation to be able to get past the guy. That wouldn't have happened if you didn't have Gronk creating the space right there. If that had been any other type of move tight end trying to do that had been blown up in the backfield, or he definitely would not have scored on that play. And those are things that they're not fully appreciated about what Gronk has done for the Patriots and what we're looking at for this team, even for this season, how much they're going to miss and how they're going to have to change this offense up a little bit. Are we going to see more, inside zone? Are we going to see more pulled blockers to account for the fact that they don't have Gronk there to sit here and seal the edge this year? I think it's differences that are not going to show up in the box score per se, but it's going to be some things that the Patriots are going to have to account for with the run game.
I think this might be Deion Lewis, no?
It might be. I forget if he was 33 or if he was 30. I forget his number.
But either way, Gronk has the most essential block in this, in my opinion. Sealing the edge, as Derek mentioned, is the most important block on almost any particular play that's going to run on the edge, because the running back's target is going to be basically Gronk's left hip. So here,
that's Deion, by the way.
When Gronk has the responsibility of sealing the edge, the reason this is important to look at is not because we just like to watch guys block efficiently. It's because this means that he stays on the field. So to bring it all full circle, earlier we discussed what makes a good tight end. Well, being on the field makes a good tight end, because a lot of times tight ends aren't schemed for their receptions, but however they're open and they're the safety blanket. That's where the safety blanket stigma comes from. When you have a tight end that you can trust to seal the edge, like Gronk did here, like we want to think that Kittel will do going forward, that makes a big difference in fantasy, because he's never going to leave the field. And part of Gronk's legacy is that he did everything. He was a Swiss Army knife for the Patriots, and that's what makes a great tight end. So if you're looking at tight ends going forward, don't just look at your Evan Ingram being a big slot receiver, because, yes, that's great for fantasy, but when it comes time to block, it's not going to be Evan Ingram trusted to seal the edge. That's for sure, and that means that he's not going to always be on the field.
To your point too, Adam, I think that can be pivotal too, because we see how crazy and very quickly the things in the NFL can change, and having a tight end that has a fully rounded skill set can not only help him, like you're talking about, stay on the field, that can make him impervious to coaching changes too and scheme changes. You have a guy that's well-rounded like that, like a TJ Hawkinson. Is he going to be a guy that you're not going to sit here and have to worry about dynasty-wise going forward if Patricia, which, dear God in heaven, I hope he's fired after this year. If he's fired, are you as worried about him moving forward with an all-around skill set as opposed to somebody like Noah Fant, or Mike Gesicki? And the jury's still out on what type of blockers, how effective they can be when blocking. So for dynasty purposes, those guys that possess both that ability to block but also be weapons in the pass game, it gives them this insulation that coaching changes, scheme changes, deployment, that you're not as worried about, as opposed to a guy like an Evan Ingram who is strictly a move tight end. And if you have a new coach that comes in and is going to establish the run and he can't block for shit, what's he going to do dynasty-wise in the next year or two if Shermer's out of there? And so I think there's a big, big difference that doesn't show up in the block and the box score. But for dynasty purposes, it can be huge in creating safety for that player moving forward.
Right. And we saw something like that happen between, I think it was the 2017-2018 season, where it was in 2017 when you lost Odell and it was just the Evan Ingram show for the most part. And he was able to take over most of that target share because there was nobody there. He was able to, suck up all of that volume that was vacated by having so many injuries on the team, that he was able to produce like a tight end one should. But you have all these players coming back, and he becomes a redundant asset within that offense. And sure, I get it. Eli Manning is not the person you want to be tied to when it comes to fantasy production. But the point is that once you have some of these players come back, and it's not just you taking up all of those targets, now your production drops off. And unless you're able to efficiently produce fantasy points, then now that becomes an issue, at least for us as dynasty owners. So I think that situation that you're talking about, where you're not able to stay on the field and produce in other ways for the team, that's when you start to you need to be able to rely on your other skill sets. You need to be able to block. You need to be able to produce in other ways in order to stay on the field. That's the same thing that we saw with Jordan Reed. Now with Washington, it wasn't necessarily just the fact that they had some other issues going on with their wide receivers and whatnot, Kirk Cousins and all that, but it was their offensive line. Jordan Reed wound up losing snaps to Vernon Davis because he wasn't on top of his injuries, he wasn't as good of a blocker. Vernon Davis understood the blocking schemes better than Jordan Reed, and so that's why you saw Vernon Davis's snaps start to tick up. And so even though, and as this clip rolls, Jordan Reed is one of the best, wide receiver, tight end, that combination, because you can see him able to drop his hips, move and change directions quickly in order to get touchdowns. But is that all the value that we need out of tight ends? And from our conversation so far this morning, that can't be the case. They need to be able to produce in other ways, right?
Oh, absolutely. And even if you look at this clip right here, you can also see, I don't know what year this clip is from, but
2016 or no, 2017. Take that back.
And I'd be willing to put money on that you don't see Jordan Reed still able to separate like this now after all these injuries and stuff. How he's able to plant his foot and separate to the catch point. Injuries have probably robbed him of that ability, at least to this degree. But like you're talking about, Chris, there has to be more to these players' games to be able to be, impervious to getting schemed out, to losing snaps for their teams. And that's a huge reason why we're talking about the Eagles earlier. I love Dallas Goedert. I'd be trying to get him on every freaking dynasty team right now that you could possibly do, because he can do what Jordan Reed is doing here. He could separate, but he is also an amazing blocker. And the needle is firmly up. I love what Jordan Reed does here, because for a guy I was talking about size before, he's been able to win on his athleticism in years past whenever he has been somewhat healthy. And I know here's all the injury jokes, but for a guy that's only 6'2", that's how he's been able to be the red zone weapon at times. He had 1 year where he had 11 touchdowns, but as the athleticism has waned, where have the touchdowns been? Poof, they've gone away. We don't see that now. I think he had 2 last year. And so, he doesn't have the size to fall back on, like we're talking about with different players like Greg Olsen we're about to watch. He doesn't have the size that he can rely upon to keep his ability in the red zone and have that high touchdown floor. Because I promise you look at a clip of him in 2018, this type of move and separation, I promise you he won't be able to sit there and do.
Yeah, not a lot of tight ends are running whip routes like this. I got in pretty much a clip for clip battle with somebody on Twitter because I said Jordan Reed was the best route running tight end in the NFL. And
he was amazing, man. The injuries, it's been a damn shame, obviously.
So unfortunate.
Considering what he could have been and what his career arc would have looked like if not concussions, not foot, not every single just myriad of injury. This guy could have, he could have been really, really special and a guy that we were talking about, like if he would have had the longevity, like the Hall of Fame type talent.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I completely agree. I will admit that I did not realize how good of a route runner Travis Kelce was at the time. And that was the defense. So he said, no, Jordan Reed's probably second to Travis Kelce. I said, you don't see tight ends running whip routes like Jordan Reed. And then he found a clip of Travis Kelce running a similar route. And I was like, wow, I did not see that in Travis Kelce's repertoire. But Jordan Reed is an example of a tight end who he's not the worst blocker in the world, I will admit. But he is the type of guy that would be immune to coaching changes because you came in and you could not take this guy off the field because he was our best wide receiver for the longest time. And now he did play a good season last year. And I think you're completely right, Derek, because he played almost, I think he played 15 of the 16 games, which is unheard of for Jordan Reed.
And the volume was there, but he didn't
two
do anything with it.
And I think it's just the injuries have torn him apart.
Yeah, because this was the Thanksgiving game against Dallas in 2017 where he wound up with the AC joint separation. That's when that one was. And I remember watching that game because I had him on a team, and once he went down in the first half, I was like, oh, well, that's the end of my week right there. I'm smoked. And then he comes back out, and I think he had like 80 yards and 2 touchdowns or something like that. I think that was the first of the 2. And I mean, he's been fun to watch because he's electric when he's on the field. But I mean, especially if he's not punching people in the helmet, I think that he's been one of those guys that separates himself as a wide receiver, as a route runner, be able to create separation. But like you guys have been saying, the injuries, the concussions. I mean, I know a lot of folks have been saying that for a while that he only has at best maybe 1 to 2 years left in the league because he's had 5 concussions, I think.
It's got to be a lot. It's like every time he gets off of a body injury, he's got to supplement a concussion in between. It's so unfortunate.
Yeah. So I think that, while we talk about what we expect from a tight end in terms of what they can bring to the field, Jordan Reed has that specific skill set, like very similar to Evan Ingram in terms of what he can do as a receiver. But it's just that unless you're able to, continue to improve as a blocker and take on the entire tight end position, you're going to see some of that production start to tail off. And I'm hoping that, especially in the case of Evan Ingram, and like we talked about David Njoku earlier, hopefully those things start to improve so that we don't have to worry about what we saw with Jordan Reed happen for some of those assets. Those assets that we can see and we can tell ourselves a story about how they can ascend into that top tier of tight ends. And then with the final example, we were talking about Greg Olsen earlier in that he is that safety blanket. For Cam Newton, he's that guy, like if they're on together, that is just, he locks onto him because in this clip from their game against the Bucks, it looks like there are at least 3 to 4 guys around Olsen, but Cam still whips it in there. I have no idea why he chose him to throw it to, but he still whipped it in there and he got it to Olsen. I have no idea how, but I guess talk to us, Derek, about Olsen's value, that what he brings to the field, and also, and how he can try and maybe stabilize Cam's value in 2019.
Well, I think that if you're looking at this clip right here, it's a perfect example of how Olsen, with his size and just his size alone, him splitting the linebackers and running straight up the seam, like that spot on the field, if he would, so Ian Thomas versus him is only 6'3". Olsen is 6'5", 6'6". I don't know if you necessarily see Ian Thomas make that same exact catch because that is sheer wingspan and coming down with it over that safety.
Right, because that should have been intercepted.
Yeah. I don't think that you look, Cam is targeting a specific spot in that end zone right there. So as Olsen breaks, he splits the middle of the 2, I think it's 2 linebackers from looking at this clip, and he's looking at that spot specifically right below the safety and whipping that in there. And I don't know if that's probably an incompletion or an interception on a guy that is smaller. So how can Greg Olsen retain his value this year? This is a perfect clip for it. His size and remaining athleticism that he has, sheer in the red zone, will allow that. And I don't necessarily know that that's going to be if, say, Greg Olsen goes down in the year, Ian Thomas is not going to be a 1-for-1 comparison in the red zone as you can't just shoo him into that Greg Olsen role. They'd have to split Ian Thomas, move him into the slot, use him in different ways. Now, whether that's in the flat because of his athleticism, whether that's using him on an out route or stacking him, in the slot off the line, but does he have the size to be able to be this type of red zone weapon? I don't think so. So I think that the role that Olsen plays for this offense is different than every other player they have because DJ Moore is not a red zone weapon. You can use McCaffrey, but is he particularly a guy that's going to out-body somebody? No. Is Curtis Samuel that guy? No. So the role that Greg Olsen plays for this offense is unlike any other player that they have on the depth chart. Now, they used to have a comparable player in Devin Funchess that they could use in that manner, but now Funchess is gone. So if Olsen goes down, this offense would have to change.
It'd have to change significantly. You don't have any size outside of Olsen. You included that Ian Thomas was kind of small, and I'm glad you mentioned he's not a one-for-one swap because he's a very talented player, but you even see in All or Nothing a little bit of the clips of why it's so difficult for a rookie tight end to produce in the first year, because it's almost impossible to play at full speed for them. They have two positions to learn at an NFL level. They've only got a couple months to do it. It doesn't make much sense for rookies to produce. The reason Evan Ingram produced is because all he had to do is run routes that he knew how to run and catch the ball, which he's really good at. So that's why he produced so well in his first year. He wasn't asked to do anything except for be athletic, pretty much be a wide receiver in his first year. And Ian Thomas was asked to be Greg Olsen in his first year. So, hey, welcome to the league. Go be a Hall of Famer. And I think the team really likes Ian Thomas, just judging solely based off the show that I'm watching currently. I think that they really like him, and I think that they understood that that's huge shoes to fill. And there's no way I like getting Ian Thomas cheap next year, but if Greg Olsen goes down, which would not be surprising whatsoever, I find it very difficult to believe that Ian Thomas does anything special. I really think that the offense changes, like you mentioned.
I'm hoping that's the case, because it seems like with all of because the news right now is really around Cam Newton and his shoulder. So if we can continue to see like this, not necessarily this level of production, but at least he's able to still rely on his, I guess, traditional targets, his traditional weapons in Greg Olsen and Christian McCaffrey in the way that he's done in the past, I mean, that still propels, Cam Newton back into that QB1 range. And so I don't think there's too many other folks, like as you were mentioning, Derek, that can do the things that Olsen does. So we need him to stay healthy. And that's where Greg Olsen becomes like that valuable tight end, even though how old is that guy? I forget how old he is now, actually, to be quite honest.
34.
34? Okay. Yeah.
He's 34.
Yeah, so even at that age, he can still produce the way that we need him to, and the way that, obviously it's the way that the Panthers need him to, right?
No, absolutely. And we're talking about his role in this offense. So just playing this narrative through, if Greg Olsen would go down, at least forecasting what could you see for the Panthers, I think that you would see them spread the offense a little bit more. You'd see Ian Thomas more in the slot. I think that this is still an offense that could be very successful, but the manner in which they would be able to and have to operate would be different.
Yeah, I think so too. I'm again hoping that that's not the case, but it seems like with similar foot injuries in the past, it takes a little while for them to get over. We saw it with Des Bryant.
If they can.
Yeah, if they can. We saw it with Des Bryant. So it seems like with the
R.I.P. Sammy Watkins.
Yes, yeah, Sammy Watkins and the like. So it seems like that is something that we will have to monitor throughout the season. But the hope is that Olsen's able to get over it before he winds up taking some sort of TV job, and hopefully does a better job than Jason Witten. But with that being said, Derek, thank you so much for taking the time to walk us through your understanding of the tight end position. My hope is, again, with this entire positional series, that folks get a better idea for how they can take the knowledge of the position as a whole and applying it to your own roster, so that you can kind of plug the leaks and gaps within your knowledge of your entire roster, and then make the moves that you need in order to really create a dynasty that is almost unstoppable within your league. I think the phrase, you want to make teams that make other people not have fun in your league because your team is so stacked. That's what you're trying to build, and that's hopefully the knowledge that we're providing. But before we get you on out of here, Derek, what other work do you? I know you've been working crazy like a madman with all the sites that you're writing for nowadays. So, the floor is yours in order to tell the folks what you've got coming during the off season, and also in season as well, man.
Thank y'all for having me again. It's always a pleasure to sit down with y'all. I love doing these series with positional, and I love what y'all got going on with the owner's manual, man. It is one of every time that somebody hits me up, slides up into those DMs, and they're like, hey, look, I just got into Dynasty. I'm following you with some good resources. I always point them y'all's direction, because the ability for a brand new Dynasty player to be able to consume this content and just the concise nature of it, and be able to walk away from all of these episodes and feel like, man, I really got an edge on this, and I really got a handle on what I need to do, not only for my team, but as far as positional wise, it's sharp content, man. I love absolutely digging into all the stuff that y'all are putting out. So thank y'all again for having me. This season, man, I got all kinds of stuff going on. So my partner in crime, like I was talking about, myself and Aton Mosey just started a podcast called Triple T Pod. Follow us over there on Twitter. We are on iTunes and stuff. We got some good people in the industry coming on the show for the next few weeks. We usually put out shows every Friday, so take a look out for that. Putting out Dynasty content, previewing some season, some redraft players over at Fantasy Data, and I'm doing a video series for the Quant Edge right now. We are coming out with 2 to 3 videos per week, and some of these are trending news, some of these are players, really diving into all of the amazing weapons, but tools that we have over at the Quant Edge that can really give you an edge, not only in Dynasty, but season-long, DFS. All of those things are over there. And right now, before they go back behind the paywall, go check it out. Sign up for a free account. Get your full NFL pass for this season. Use the promo code DBRO, TQE. And yeah, man, I've got all kinds of stuff in the works. And it is a blast because, look, football is back in training camps. It is going to be week 1 before we know it, guys.
I can't believe the summer has already passed us by, and now we're getting. I mean, we've got preseason work, preseason probably within the next few weeks. So it's wild to think that we're already back into football mode. But Adam, before we get on out of here, do we have anything else for the folks?
Yeah, thanks so much for joining us, Derek. And I was a TQE user for DFS last year. It's almost essential, especially to see matchups and positional percentages and matchups. Is almost an essential tool. So fantastic site you guys have over there.
Well, we got more stuff coming out too, man. They got a pace tool, and we've done all kinds of crazy stuff with the wide receiver cornerback tool. It's some crazy shit we got rolling out this year.
Well, I'll be subscribing, and hopefully you all subscribe to our show. Like, rate, review. Follow us on Twitter at Dynasty Manual. Follow me at APWILDE. And check us out on the DLF Mailbag Show. We're revamping it a little after we did some trial runs, and we'll be back shortly.
Absolutely. And, of course, if you wanted to actually meet both of us, Adam, myself, Dwight, and Andrew from the Devy Owners Manual will all be meeting up at the Midwest Fantasy Expo that's going to be held up in Canton. So Bob Lung that we had on for the running back part of the positional series, he is the organizer, and he's putting all that stuff together. And we'll have a booth for the Owners Manual. So if you happen to be there, if you want to get tickets, sign up with our promo code Automatic when you go to purchase your tickets for the expo. Then come find us. Come check us out. I know there are going to be plenty of other folks. I know that Bob Harris from Football Diehards, he just signed on in order to show up. Folks from RotoViz. There's going to be so many other folks there. I mean, I think it's going to be fun in order to get the fantasy community, or some folks from the fantasy community, together for that day. So it's going to be on August 18th up in Canton. So come check us out if you're going to be in the area. But for Derek, for Adam, I'm Chris. You can find me on Twitter at ChrisAllenFFWX. We thank you all for listening, and we'll catch you guys next week.
Good show, guys.
Good stuff, guys. Sorry I ran long. I get